that section of the talk.
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry about that. Yeah. No. So yeah, ask the.
So ask your questions as I'm progressing. But Paul's going to be my assistant here. Working the PowerPoint and reminding me if anyone, or cutting in and telling me if anyone's got a question. So if you put your hand up, and Paul will respond.
Just on that, by the way, guys, there is the option to raise your hand with the little reactions at the bottom in the screen. So Paul, not that you're competitive, but this is a record. We have 38 people in attendance.
There you go then.
So
right. Well, that's good to know. That's good to know. So, right, where are we? Let's start, shall we? Slideshow. There we go. Stop telling me about it. Let's start now from the beginning. Right, everybody. Morning. Sunny Tuesday morning, isn't it? Very cold, but not to worry. Hopefully, everybody can now see my screen. The orange being our corporate colours, but also it tends to wake everybody up a little bit. So we're nice and bright and turning the sunshine onto an extremely exciting topic of business interruption insurance. So CEC, we're a partner of Movo, as many of you probably already know. We provide a specialist claims support for your clients. We've been doing so for a number of years now, and I'm sure we've helped or advised on many types of claim that you've probably you've put forward to us from many different people on the call today. I think today's conversation is centered around business interruption and avoiding the pitfalls, and we're joined today by one of CEC's leading adjusters, Roger Topping, who is going to talk us through it. So we've got some slides, and as Roger said there at the start, though, it'd be fab if anything that sparked interest or pricked the ears, you raise it, put your hand in the air, and we can try to help you out along the way. No questions daft, don't worry. We're not all masterminds. Well, I'm certainly not anyway. So honestly, put your hand in the air and we can try and help out as we go through. And it'd be quite good fun, actually, if you've got a question that you might be able to bamboozle Roger with. It'd be like bowling him a googly, something like that. That'd be great. But anyway, I'll stop rabbiting on now and pass you over to Roger, who, as you can see on the screen at the moment, on the right-hand side, has a CV which many of us would be very proud of. So if you want to take a little read of that, and I shall pass over to Roger, and hope you all enjoy the session.
Thank you, Paul. Do I have to do anything in terms of my screen, or is that?
No, I can do that. I can do that for you.
Right.
So if
okay.
if you want to just briefly just tell them about your background.
Okay. Well, you don't really need to go into a lot of detail there. Just need to know that I started loss adjusting a long time ago. In fact, I began my loss adjusting career when Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister. So that just gives an indication of just how long ago it was. Over the years, dealt with very many business interruption claims. But I have to say, in all my time, I've never sold a business interruption policy or assessed for a client directly their BI needs. But I have seen plenty of things that have gone wrong. And I hope that today I'll be able to make you aware of some of those and avoid them, so that you have a plain sailing experience. Can we move on to the next screen, Paul? We've had enough of me, I think, on that. Right, here we go. What we're talking about here, I'm not sure about the level of experience that you have with business interruption, but like any other insurance policy, it's intended to indemnify the policyholder for their losses. So it's to try to return the business, and it's exclusively a business type of policy, a product rather, obviously it's in the title, business interruption, to return the business to its pre-loss financial state. There are different ways of trying to do that. The major policy, the one that's I would say 90% of policies are ensuring gross profit. Now that is a term which is never quite universally accepted by the accountancy profession, but in loss adjust or insurance terms, it is specified in the policy. It's covering the basic way of defining a gross profit loss on a difference basis. The turnover of the business less the purchases, which are the cost of the raw materials, plus any uninsured working expenses. Now that should, if in a theoretical world, it should return the policyholder to the position that they were in before the interruption. Because if you think about it, the only costs that they have that have continued are the, well, it's everything else. So it's not the purchases that they would buy to sell on. So they haven't had to buy any stock because the business has been closed, and they haven't had to incur any of the other usual uninsured working expenses. And those would typically be packaging, carriage and freight. They are things that very often are specified as being uninsured working expenses, but it would be possible when you're presenting to an insurer to go into more details of other costs that you might not want to insure. For instance, subcontractors, labor costs, for instance. If your business isn't trading and you have no need of subcontractors, there's no need to be insuring those costs. So therefore they shouldn't form part of your the gross profit calculation. Now, the next, is there any other cover available apart from gross profit? Well, you can insure gross revenue. You've probably heard that that is a type of cover that's available. It basically gives the same indemnity because although you're insuring all of the policyholders' turnover, there will still be adjustment required for any costs of the business that are not incurred after the interruption. So gross revenue is typically would be a policy that would be recommended for a service provider. So for instance, a solicitor or accountant or someone who was providing only services because they have no cost of sales. They don't actually have to make any purchases. They just provide the service and that is provided by the staff. So it's made simpler as well because there's no calculation of the rate of gross profit. You're just covering basically turnover, but then making the adjustments after the incident has occurred for any of the costs of the business that have stopped being incurred. If a client feels that they have, they can carry on with their business regardless of any temporary problem that they might occur at their premises. For instance, if they can quickly relocate and any disaster that might happen to property will not damage their ability to continue trading, then an increased cost of working cover might be appropriate. So they would only have cover for any extra costs incurred. For instance, if they had to rent alternative premises and those premises were more expensive than their normal premises, then the increased costs would be part of the claim. But it would only be the increased costs that they would be covered for, not any reduction in their gross profit. There's also another type of cover that you'll have seen, additional increased costs of working, and this covers increased costs of working that are uneconomic. So if the general test of increased cost of working, which I'll come on to in a little bit later, is that they have to be economic. The insurers will not meet the cost of extra expenditure if the profit that's saved by the extra expenditure is less than that expenditure. So in other words, they're not going to spend £2 to save £1. Funnily enough, they think that's a bad idea. So but if you have additional increased cost of working cover, then you could legitimately say that it was so important for the business long term that they wanted to have this additional, they wanted to spend £2 to save £1. Sorry. Is someone interrupting me? I can't hear. No, they're not. Right. Okay, I'll carry on. Well, the other thing I've looked at here, declaration cover. One of the problems with business interruption and gross profit, it can be the effect of average or its proportional reductions, technically, in business interruption. One of the ways to avoid that is to choose a declaration basis cover. The theory here is that you're covered, you give the insurer a provisional sum insured. There's no average in the policy, but if the provisional sum insured is too high, then there's a return of premium at the end of the policy year. If the sum insured is too low, then you pay an extra premium. So that's the way that the insurers or cope with the difficulty of getting the sum insured right on a business interruption policy. The main thing to bear in mind when you're looking at these types of things, there's the variable costs of the business, and those are the costs that are not being covered by the policy. So variable costs are the purchases of stock and other expenditure which varies directly with sales. So if sales stop or if sales are reduced, the variable costs all reduce at the same rate. And that is a variable costs which you do not need to insure, because obviously if you're not incurring if you're not trading, then you don't need to insure those costs. Whereas standing charges, which typically would be the costs that the business has to incur, whether it's trading on or whether it's actually selling anything or not. So this would be rent, rates, insurances, fees for various services that the company licenses, perhaps, leasing arrangements, bank charges, all of the normal costs of the business, annual costs generally, that will continue even if they stop. Even if it's prevented from trading because of a fire or another peril. Okay. One thing I would say here as well, just quickly, I've talked about a loss of turnover. Something to remember here is that the policy does not cover loss of production. And that's sometimes an issue that arises because if someone has a small or a factory or a workshop, they may be closed for a quite short period, perhaps a day or two. If they are unable to show that their turnover has been affected by the interruption to the business, then technically speaking, the policy gives them no cover. So it's only cover for turnover loss, not for production loss. Now, sometimes a production loss can only be made up by working overtime, and this is a way that we would often try to explain to an insurer that the policyholders had to catch up by working evenings, weekends, and the extra cost of that overtime will form an increased cost of working, which would be presented as the claim. So indirectly, the insured would try to get back what they have thought they've lost. But very often a policyholder will say, well, I know that my time is worth X thousand pounds per hour. If I haven't been able to work for 10 hours, I've lost 10 times X. But that's not the way that the policy looks at it. You have to show a loss of turnover and proving a loss of production is not enough. Same problem can arise for call centres or other places where there are interruptions which don't immediately show a loss of server. You just have or it's very difficult to demonstrate it. Let's put it like that. Okay, Paul. Next slide, please. Okay, factors to consider. You'll know that the policy period is 12 months, and that's standard. The cover is in place from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. But the indemnity period is the period that you're covering your client for if they've suffered any losses. Now, 12 months indemnity period was standard many years ago, but this is now extended, and it's a good job too, because 24 months, 36 months, it can take a very long time for a business to get back to trading in the same way it would have done if the loss had not occurred. There are factors here that you need to take into account, and this is what I've suggested. Time likely for the repair reinstatement of finding alternative premises. So this is the practical issues of the premises. How long will it take them to potentially repair? And I can imagine clients being, in fact, people have said to me, oh, it wouldn't take long to rebuild this place. Yes, that's true. That might be true, but there's also other things to consider. For instance, the time it would take for the sales to return to normal. Now, this you might think, oh well, I can get back into business quite quickly, and can get back into production, or I can open my shop again, or I can supply my customers quickly. But what if those customers have moved on? What if they found somewhere else that they can get their supplies from, or have demoted you in the pecking order of clients, particularly the large supermarkets. If there's any interruption to supply, you might have been top of the list to supply Tesco or Marks and Spencer's, but if you even have quite a short interruption, maybe just a month or so, you'll go back down to the bottom of the list, and it may take you years to get back up to the top of the list, regardless of how good your product and service might be. So that's something to bear in mind there when you're looking at the length of the indemnity period that you're choosing. There are other unknown factors as well. I've mentioned there recruitment. If you're in a business where it's difficult to recruit staff or to get licenses to carry on with the business that you have, or possibly planning is a problem. I know I've had problems in the past in Scotland, remote locations, where getting planning approval can take ages, and not just months, but years. These things all need to be considered in advance when you're suggesting to clients their indemnity period. And I just said, expect the unexpected. Here we're into sort of known unknowns territory here. There could be all sorts of snags that you might not anticipate. Problems in construction or problems in repair, because there's other issues with the building which need to be taken into account, which will delay. Okay, next slide, Paul. Now we're getting into the meaty stuff here. Avoiding the pitfalls. This is, and I've split this into two sections. First of all, the pitfalls with the insurers, and this is just things that you want to be aware of to make sure you can't be criticised if things don't go to plan. First of all, things to be aware of: the definition of gross profit. I would always recommend inspecting the accounts of the business that you're insuring, just to see what is included as a cost of sale. I've spoken to many people when I've asked them, business owners, what's your rate of gross profit, and they give me one figure, And then when I look at their accounts, I realize that gross profit as insured by the policy is different from the way in which they consider it themselves. And the reason for that is that often a business, and quite legitimately, can include certain types of wages as a cost of sale that they don't want to insure, when in fact the policy says that they do need to insure them. So all wages of direct employees are always part of gross profit, so should be insured as gross profit. So there can be also other factors that are included in the definition of gross profit, which are included or not properly assigned in the accounts, or not assigned in the way that we would expect them to be for the purposes of insurance. So take a look at the accounts, make sure you've got the turnover, and then that will make sure that doesn't become a problem. It's very difficult when you're presenting a claim and you're given some accounts which show that some costs have been included as a cost of sale, when in fact they should be part of gross profit, and that is really a basic pitfall to try to avoid. Next one is getting the right sum insured for the right indemnity period. I spoke earlier on about choosing a longer period, and I would recommend, be on the safe side. 24 months, 36 months is very often needed. But you need to remember that when you're assessing the sum insured for that indemnity period, you need to include every year. So if you've got a 3-year indemnity period, then you should have 3 times the gross profit that you've shown in year 1. In fact, you should actually be insuring a lot more than that, because you've got to look at the trend of the business, which is what the loss adjuster will do, that the insurer appoints. He or she will look back into the past historical trading of the business and project that forward. So if the business is growing 5 or 10% a year, at the date when the policy is taking off, say it's now, 8th of March 2022, the policy covers for a year. So if there was to be a fire on the 1st of March 2023, and there was a 3-year indemnity period, you've got to project that forward to assess the sales and the gross profit that would have occurred right up until the 1st of March, or the 28th of February in 2026. So in fact, you're projecting forward 4 years, and have got to have a sum insured that's adequate to cover not just the annual turnover, but the projected turnover for that full 4-year period. So it's quite a challenge to work out what is the correct figure, which is why the declaration policy that I mentioned earlier can be quite attractive. That way you don't have a problem with average. You do have to make your declarations at year end, but you end up paying the fair premium for the cover that you needed. There's another question here: additional increased costs of working. I've got to say that I'm not a great fan of this type of cover, because in 40 plus years, I can't remember ever having dealt with a claim where it was actually used. So I wouldn't say it's never used, but it is extremely, extremely rare. And although it might sound to be you're giving a client something extra and it doesn't cost very much, it's actually almost completely useless. And we're much better for them to spend the money on increasing the sum insured. I've had numerous examples of underinsurance where there is actually additional increased cost of working cover, which is of no value to the client at all. But if they'd had the premium spent on increasing the sum insured, that would have been much more value to them. So I maybe I don't know what the commission is that's earned on selling additional increased cost of working cover, but the best advice, my advice to clients would be, it's not really something that you need. Increase the sum insured, which is much more likely to be useful to you. One of the things that I've come on here, extensions normal as standard. Yeah, so there's I may be teaching my grandmother to suck eggs here, but the type of policy that you're selling, you should be looking to check whether there's cover for damage that might be caused in customers or suppliers' premises that can affect your client's business. Sometimes, many policies it's covered anyway. It might be important to try and recommend to the client that there's a named supplier or a named customer that's so important to your business that if any losses were suffered by that party, so your customer is no longer buying anything from you because they've had a fire, just the amount of cover that you've got for the effect that that has on your business. Then I've mentioned denial of access. Yeah, most policies cover denial of access when there's damage to other property in the vicinity, even if it's not owned by the insured, you're insured. But there's also, as you've seen the publicity recently, for cover that is available in some policies for non-damage denial of access. This covers situations where there's either an emergency, as we've seen through COVID, or murder or suicide or other events that can cause the business to close. So again, checking the cover. How are we doing? Right. I've not heard any questions.
Any questions? Yeah. Any questions, anybody?
If anyone's got any questions or anything that has sounded a bit strange to you that I've already said,
Roger,
by all means, interrupt.
Roger.
Morris.
Hiya. Is it safe to say to a client when they say what is insurance gross profit, to say to them, take your accountant's gross profit and add in wages? Is that safe?
Well, that's not really, because there could be other things in the accountants. It's not just wages that accountants can put in there. Sometimes they might put other overheads which they think in their terms variable, so they're variable costs, but they may be costs that the company are committed to pay or to continue paying even if they don't trade. So I would be on the safe side, Morris, and want to look at the accounts.
Yeah.
Just to yeah, that's a loss adjuster's answer, because we're cautious and disbelieve. But I would say look at the account. But you're right. The wages are the biggest problem. You know, often you'll find wages shown as a cost of sale or partial wages, and that should be taken out of the cost of sale and put into gross profit.
I get asked the question very often by clients is, what's the difference between insurance gross profit and my accountant's gross profit? Because they call it both the same. So yeah. I typically say that insurance gross profit includes wages, whereas your accountants won't.
Well, it also includes anything else that is not a well, the policy does it the other way around. So it looks at sales, and the only thing you can take off sales are purchases and uninsured working expenses, and those can be specified in the policy, but it typically packaging, carriage and freight, because they would automatically stop if you're not making deliveries to anybody, because you're not trading, then you're not going to be incurring any costs like that. So yeah, it's a shortcut version, Morris, yes, but it's not completely foolproof. That's what I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
My last slide is talking about managing expectations. Now, this is I've included this because since I've been representing policyholders, and which I've done now for over 10, 15 years, there are some things that have cropped up which you could perhaps mention to clients, talk to them about even before they've set up the policy, because it will avoid them thinking that they're insuring when they're perhaps not going to get a claim paid. And one of the first one here, formal records. Clients sometimes don't realise that they will need to produce evidence to show the level of historical sales, and evidence is going to be quite strict. It's not going to be, their own handwritten sales book or their own spreadsheets of what their business has done. The insurer's loss adjuster will expect to see the accounts, so that's going to be very important to assess the rate of gross profit. If there aren't accounts, then they'll want to see VAT returns, because they generally trust the returns that are made to HMRC for VAT, because they know that traders can't start fiddling with those because there are very serious penalties for that. So the VAT returns are trusted. In the event that there aren't VAT returns or annual accounts because the business has only just started, then they might rely on management accounts, but they will require some formal records. So if you're dealing with a client who has a cash business and doesn't register to VAT, despite the fact that their sales are in excess of £85,000 per annum, which is the threshold, there's going to be problems. And more than once, on many occasions, I could say, a client comes to me and says, well, I've been doing, £15,000 a month, and at that rate of gross profit, that's £10,000 a month. I've been doing it for the last 18 months. I said, well, why haven't you registered for VAT? Oh, well, I've not quite got round to it. Well, if we put those figures to the insurers, there's every likelihood they will not accept that explanation and say that the business has been trading illegally, which essentially it has. So that's going to be a big problem, because the client will say, well, I've got, that's what I've done. I say, yeah, well, we need to prove it, and we need to prove why you haven't registered for VAT, which is a statutory obligation on any business that is eligible for VAT. So, if there's I'm sure that you'll have come across it. I had a claim recently. I wasn't directly involved in it presenting the claim, thank goodness, but it turned out that this it was for a restaurant that had been running for over 10 years and had won awards, but the restaurant, when it turned out the trading name was not the name of the business that actually owned it. In fact, it turned out that the business that owned it had changed names about 7 or 8 times in that 10 years. And none of those businesses had ever registered for VAT. And if they had, then the VAT VAT that should have been charged was over £1 million, about £100,000 a year. So the business had been just simply running for 15 months or so, and then folding up and reforming again with a different name, probably a different director, and trading again. So this creates huge problems when the business tries to make a business interruption claim on several fronts. So for clients that are that have this business model, which I seem to find quite a lot in hospitality and that type of industry, that sector, it is quite difficult to achieve a settlement when you've got a client who is running their operations in that way. Second point to consider, Evidence to prove standard turnover. Now, the standard turnover is the benchmark against which the insurers will decide what the turnover is that ought. So this is the turnover that ought to have been achieved. Essentially, it's the when we're comparing what's actually been achieved with what ought to have been achieved, the ought to have been achieved is called standard turnover. And to get to that standard turnover, the policy allows us to look at all of the historical trading of the business and to adjust that for any what's called other circumstances that may have influenced it. So if there's something else that perhaps another business down the road that did the same thing, which is closed, that would have resulted in increased turnover for us had we not had the fire. So that is quite a useful way of demonstrating the way that well, you've got to try and find the evidence to prove it. Let's put it like that. If you have the evidence and you can prove it, then you can achieve the client's expectations. But for the client simply to come and say, oh well, this and that would have happened, so therefore I'm entitled to a much greater level of reduced turnover, that on its own is not good. You need evidence, and as I said before, loss adjusters working for insurers, they will expect that if they're going to depart from their normal. So the other circumstances clause is a great way of helping policyholders, but they do need to have the evidence to back it up. So if someone says, well, my rate of gross profit was going to increase, I was expecting to be making much more money on all of these things I was selling or this food. So right, okay, let's look at the evidence. Where's the evidence to prove it? So it might seem an obvious thing to say, but you'd be surprised how many clients think that you're just going to, or the insurers are just going to accept this type of thing without any evidence to back it up. The next item I've listed there, explaining savings and deductions that will be made. The policyholders will only get back the gross profit that they've lost, and this is, we go back to the very first slide, the profit that they would have made, covering the net profit plus the standing charge, or the standing costs, the annual figures that they still have to pay. Those that's the insurer's liability. If there are some standing charges that the insurers have not had to pay, sorry, that the clients have not had to pay, for instance, in the latest COVID claims, we've been hearing about because the government subsidised rates, and it also made furlough payments, so that staff costs were reduced for most businesses, certainly in most businesses. So these counter savings, because the business has no longer had to pay those standing charges. Clients often have difficulty coping with that idea, but it's quite logical. If you've insured costs but then have not had to pay them, so if you've insured wages but you haven't had to pay your staff have left, or for whatever reason, or perhaps the client has taken the opportunity to make staff redundant, those are costs that the business no longer has. That doesn't save money for the business, it saves money for the insurer. That's to be contrasted with situations where very often small businesses can't afford to carry on paying their staff. Now, sometimes loss adjusters, and I've got a claim on the go at the moment, are just a small fish and chip shop, as it turns out, which has had to close because its floors subsided. There's a big gap under the floor, so they couldn't carry on working. It's only a small shop, and the husband and wife who run the shop and their one full-time employee have not been able to take any wages because the business hasn't traded. But the insurers have said, oh, well, you're showing a wages saving here in your accounts. I said, well, that's just because we haven't had the money. We can't carry on paying if the business isn't trading. So we have to persuade the insurers and the loss adjusters that this is just a postponement of the payment of wages. It's not that they've been saved for eternity. This is just postponement temporarily until the business has the resources which it's entitled to get from the business interruption claim to pay those wages. So that wages in those circumstances is not a saving. It's just a postponement of the eventual payment to the policy to the employees. Finally, on this, I look at alternative trading. This brings me a little one of my favourite stories. Sad as I am, in the Orkney Islands there are, or there used to be, 3 hotels, and it was the same person who owned all 3 hotels, but he'd taken legal and accountancy advice and very wisely insured these 3 hotels as 3 separate companies. And as it turned out, it saved him, or it made him, an awful lot of money, because when one hotel was burnt down in a fire, the insurers were obliged, of that business, were obliged to pay his loss of profit for the closure period. But in fact, what happened was that all the people who would have stayed at that hotel went to stay at the other 2 hotels. So the other 2 hotels did booming business, but the hotel that was fire damaged obviously did none. But if these businesses had all been, or these hotels had all been insured by the same business, the insurers would have applied the alternative trading clause, which means that the turnover that was achieved by the business at the other 2 hotels would have been taken into account in reckoning up the loss of turnover. And if the turnover is the same for 2 hotels in total as for 3 hotels in total, there would have been no BI loss.
So Roger, effectively this could be something similar to COVID claims last year, where shop fronts decided retailers couldn't open their doors to customers, but what they did was they did home deliveries, or they did internet trading, or they found other ways of trading, which would be
absolutely, Paul. I've
Yeah.
had cases where people have done their very best to save their business. So in fact, I've got an argument on the go at the moment with a business that had normally a rate of gross profit of over 70%, but to try to save the business and to keep the workforce going and everything else, they reverted to supplying PPE equipment and managed to achieve some sales that way, but at a much lower rate of gross profit, only about 20%. But the insurers and their forensic accountants have used the turnover that was generated by the PPE sales and tried to offset that turnover against the normal turnover at the much higher rate of gross profit. So we've had to say, well, no, the gross profit achieved by the alternative trading was much lower, and use the gross profit against gross profit rather than turnover against turnover. So yes, it's that alternative trading is something that policyholders they invariably think that, well, the insurer isn't entitled to the benefit of that because that's my ingenuity as a business owner that's generated it. But the insurers don't think of it that way. So you as a managing the client's expectations before they can, if they've got other business ideas whilst their main business is not able to trade, the best thing to do is to start a new business and to run the alternative trading business through the new business, not through the insured business. I mean, that's quite a legal and legitimate thing to do, and it will still mean that the business losses from the original business will be covered.
Cool. Okay.
Well, that's just about everything I've planned to say. So I'm welcome to take any questions that anyone wants to fire at me.
No, I think that's good. Let's see if there's any questions from the floor.
Hi, Paul and Roger. It's Andrew here.
Hi, Andrew. Hi.
Hi, Andrew.
Hi. I've got 3 clients who are still struggling with Hiscox BI payments because Hiscox are still stating they weren't mandated to close.
Yeah.
They're on the I think they're all on the hybrid 1 wording, which provides cover, and they all do similar business. So they basically rent out cameras for film production.
All right. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, is that a legitimate reason? Because I've got 1 in Scotland and actually two in England, so they fall under different COVID requirements, but certainly they're all told to work from home and you know, all but essential work, I think, initially at the end of March 2020.
Well, you're looking at then you're looking at the categories of business that were where the closure was obligatory, and I know that this is what Hiscox are doing.
Yeah.
They're only indemnifying businesses that were forced to close, and although the advice from government and Boris was to work from home, the regulations, and these are the ones that I can send you, Andrew, that there's only certain types of businesses that were told that they must not open, and that was pubs and restaurants, places of entertainment, theatres, bowling alleys. There's a whole long list of them in the regulations, which I can send to you. You can get access to on site. But Hiscox have been absolutely pedantic, really, in the way that they've done this. So, for instance, cinemas couldn't open, and they are in that group. But I had a business, someone referred a case to me where it was a company that supplied sweets and confectionery and other things to cinemas. That business, Hiscox say, was not prohibited from trading, so they wouldn't pay them. But they would pay if it was a cinema, they would pay it, but because it was a business that supplied cinemas, they wouldn't. And I think, unfortunately, your example is in the same mold. You know, someone who's there was no sporting events or other events taking place where photographers were needed or cameras were needed, so the product wasn't needed, the service wasn't needed because of government regulations, but actually the business premises could still theoretically trade. So that's it seems very unfair, and I absolutely sympathise with the client, but that's what Hiscox have interpreted the legal decision to be.
Right. Okay. And that it sounds like that's up for debate, though.
Yeah, there's a few action groups sitting in the wings watching what is happening at the moment with some of the other cases that are running through. And just the week before last, there's this case of Corbyn and King against AXA, which has sort of opened the door for a few more possible claims for non-damage denial of access, if there's cover there for emergency closure. And I've sent something around to everybody, hoping that they'll sort of review their policies. And I know that Morris has sent me something on that yesterday. So there's some opportunities there, but at much lower levels, because generally speaking, that cover is only up to a limit of, say, £10,000 or so. It depends.
Yeah, there's a 100 grand limit. Yeah.
Well,
under the main, under them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's. I think there might be other limits for on other policies. Maybe his policy is different. So I wouldn't give up on it, but it's looking at a very tall order. I would say in that wording that restrictions. You'd have said that restrictions should just be any sort of restriction which hinders the way that a business trades is a valid point of cover. But the Hiscox have interpreted the Supreme Court's reading as meaning that restrictions must be restrictions that prevented opening at all, and I think that's unfair. I think what you'd have said was even if there had been perhaps restrictions that the government had imposed, which simply put limits on, for instance, if the government had imposed the restrictions on bars, on table service, etc., without any closures, I think there's still, so imagine that COVID had occurred, but there hadn't been any closures required, but they had just imposed restrictions saying it must be table service. That would have had an effect on sales, and I think that would have been a valid claim. But the way that the Supreme Court decision has been interpreted is that the restriction is only valid if it actually closed the business entirely. But I think there's an arguable case, and maybe, you know, there are action groups out there that are sort of even now finding solicitors who'll take that argument on. But I'm not directly involved in any of those, Andrew.
Okay, maybe I can catch up with you afterwards.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know of any, so I think it's a question of researching the internet and sort of chat forums, and I know that the group that went to
there was a Hiscox action group that was set up by media businesses.
The claims that went to Mishkondareya, the solicitors, and actually took part in the Supreme Court action with the FCA. They reached a settlement out of court with Hiscox, which was completely confidential. So no one really knows what was allowed and what wasn't allowed in that settlement. So I think there would be, I suspect that there are solicitors out there somewhere that are putting together another group of discontented Hiscox policyholders to have another go at them. And I think there's definitely arguments there, but it's not me, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right.
We're doing that, but it needs to be solicitors. That's the reason. It's not because I'm ducking it because I don't want to be involved in it. It's because I have not got the power to institute proceedings or to actually appoint counsel and take the legal matter forward. Those decisions by Hiscox, they're not open to persuasion, and we found this again and again. Once the insurers have taken a legal opinion on their COVID liability, they're not interested in me trying to persuade them. They're just they've made their mind up.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Greg.
Just looking at the time, what else have we? Has anybody else got any other questions or thoughts on anything else? No. Okay. Well, hopefully today's been a little bit more sort of informative and helpful for everybody. Obviously, Lawrence.
No, carry on, Paul.
No, okay. Hopefully it's been helpful and I say informative for a lot of people. It's a big subject, and there are lots of pitfalls that we can find ourselves in. Look, we're always here to help out the best we can. Obviously, the CEC service starts at as little as £2 a year, and we are here to help you as brokers and ultimately your clients, and help steer them and navigate them through anything that comes along in a complicated and technical claims manner. It's obviously worth pointing out that we will be at your conference later this month, and so obviously if any of you have got any questions or you want to come and have a chat, then we'd be more than welcome to more than keen to have a cup of tea with you and tell you a little bit more about what we do and how we do it. So yeah, I think that's probably 2 minutes to spare.
Well, I was just going to say thank you so much, because I think that's been really informative. I hope everybody else has thought so. I think it's a bit of an eye opener, you know, when you have a claim, that's when you suddenly realize, actually, hold on, I might need some advice from my client. And that's where companies like CEC can really add value. You know, it's one of those things you don't know you need it until you need it. Just so everybody knows, the presentation will be shared by Paul, please. So I'll upload that onto Movo Buddy. We are recording this, and that will be uploaded to Movo Buddy too. So if you want to sort of rewatch it or anything like that, then it's free. The other thing that I am aware of that we have internally is we do have a BI calculator. So I'm going to see if we can get that Movo branded, or even that you'll be able to make it your own branding. So leave that one with me. And that might be something I can share on Movo Buddy as well, which might be quite beneficial to you as well, to help you in making sure. But the message I think today is actually have more sum insured than you probably need. Go declaration based if you can, because it gives you the added protection. Would you agree with that, Roger?
Absolutely, absolutely, Julie. That's very good advice.
So the more you can afford, better to do, buy more, whether it's indemnity period, sum insured, or declaration.
Yes,
and don't bother about additional increased cost of working, which is a real opener for me.
Yeah.
There you go.
So
Learn something new every day.
you do indeed. But I will stop the recording. If anybody's got any other questions and they want to, we'll stay on here and you can ask afterwards. So
Yep. Well, I mean, the CEC service is there, so if anyone's got any problems, they can use that, and it sort of gets filtered by CEC and then comes to an adjuster.